coronavirus relief. President-elect Joe Biden offers his plan to stimulate the economy and expand vaccinations. Impeachment fallout. More reaction from Capitol Hill to the second impeachment of President Donald Trump. No stimulus for abortion. Some Republicans are fighting to stop Planned Parenthood from getting relief payments. And a lasting legacy. As we draw closer to Martin Luther King Jr. Day, his niece, pro-life advocate Alveda King, tells us about the civil rights leader. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, January 15th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. We begin tonight with some major changes to the upcoming March for Life in Washington, D.C. Organizers for the event say the rally, which is scheduled for January 29th, will now take place virtually. The president of the March for Life, Jeannie Mancini, says in a statement, quote, the protection of all those who participate in the annual march, as well as the many law enforcement personnel and others who work tirelessly each year to ensure a safe and peaceful event, is a top priority of the March for Life. In light of the fact that we are in the midst of a pandemic, which may be peaking, and in view of the heightened pressures that law enforcement officers and others are currently facing in and around the Capitol, this year's March for Life will look different. This is video right here of a previous March for Life in D.C. For this year's event, the March for Life is asking participants to stay home and instead join online. However, a small group of pro-life leaders will still march in D.C. this year. Meantime, President-elect Joe Biden calls it his American Rescue Plan. Tonight, we share the key proposals that could impact you and your family. Plus, security concerns cause a delay for the rehearsal of the presidential inauguration ceremony. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. Tonight, the Associated Press is reporting that President Donald Trump will exit the White House next Wednesday morning before the inauguration and head off to Florida. Meantime, President-elect Joe Biden's $1.9 trillion coronavirus plan will certainly add more to the debt, but he says the money is needed now.
We need more action, more bipartisanship, and we need to move quickly. We need to move fast.
President-elect Joe Biden laying out his American Rescue Plan. Some key items: $1,400 per person checks to households across America, $130 billion to help schools safely reopen, raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour, extend the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, and provide a $400 per week unemployment insurance supplement.
We'll also provide more peace of mind for struggling families by extending unemployment insurance beyond the end of March for millions of workers.
Meanwhile, rehearsal for the inauguration ceremony is being delayed over security concerns. Online chatter indicated there could be protests Sunday, so they moved the rehearsal to Monday.
Again, no specific credible threats, but the chatter focused on that day is something we're paying close attention to.
Federal prosecutors say the mob that stormed the Capitol last week aimed to capture and assassinate elected officials. Meanwhile, in West Virginia, as a divided and wounded nation looks for healing, Vice President Mike Pence today honors the memory of one man Americans of all backgrounds and parties agreed was a true hero, the World War II fighter pilot and greatest of aviators, Chuck Yeager.
On the death of Abner, it is written that King David said, "Do you not realize that a commander and a great man has fallen in Israel this day?" Chuck Yeager was such a man.
Also tonight, we're learning that in a phone call, Vice President Mike Pence congratulated Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. And as for Joe Biden's inauguration itself, the invocation will be given by Jesuit priest Father Leo O'Donovan, former Georgetown University president, and the benediction will be given by Reverend Sylvester Beeman of Bethel AME Church in Wilmington, Delaware. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Speaker Nancy Pelosi says House managers are solemnly and prayerfully preparing for the Senate impeachment trial of President Trump.
They're now working on taking this to trial, and you'll be the first to know when we announce that we're going over there.
A single article of impeachment for incitement of insurrection was approved by the House. 9 House Democrats will argue the case for impeachment. Senate Republicans remain skeptical about the charge. President-elect Joe Biden has nominated Isabel Guzman to lead the Small Business Administration. However, until she is confirmed, Jovita Carranza, President Trump's appointee, is still in the role, and GOP senators are calling on her to stop the flow of COVID relief funds to the nation's largest abortion provider. Correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, 31 Republican senators are calling on the Small Business Administrator to require Planned Parenthood to return funds they took under the COVID Relief Payment Protection Program. They say that smaller abortion provider affiliates of Planned Parenthood fall under the national umbrella of the organization, and so they don't qualify for COVID relief dollars.
This was a fraudulent act by these Planned Parenthood affiliates.
Republican Senator Ben Sasse joined 30 of his GOP colleagues in a letter to the head of the Small Business Administration. They want to stop Planned Parenthood's, quote, naked attempts to defraud the United States government and prevent them from cashing in on the second round of the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program.
That's to help small businesses, not big abortion. And we should be clear about who Planned Parenthood is. Planned Parenthood is the largest abortion business in America.
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell condemned Planned Parenthood for accessing the cash.
Disrespecting human life is their central mission, and they just took advantage of a national crisis and helped themselves to tens of millions of taxpayer dollars they were clearly forbidden from taking.
In a July letter, House Democrats accused Republicans of attempting, quote, a coordinated effort to use the coronavirus pandemic to attack Planned Parenthood on ideological grounds. They continue, because local Planned Parenthood organizations operate as independent 501c3 organizations, those that have 500 or fewer employees are not barred from participating in the PPP. Republican Senator Marco Rubio argues that's not true.
Their parent company is sitting on net assets of over $500 million, and no affiliate of that organization can even operate or even exist without approval of that board. So they violate the affiliation rules, and they should have known that, and someone at SBA should have known that too.
The Republicans say they want the Small Business Administration to ensure additional relief funds go to those who need it and not what they call unscrupulous organizations like Planned Parenthood. On Capitol Hill, Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
South Carolina lawmakers are again considering a bill that would ban most abortions in the state. The so-called heartbeat abortion ban is likely to pass this time around. Conservatives made gains in the General Assembly. The South Carolina law would ban abortions once babies' heartbeats can be detected. The death toll from last night's earthquake in Indonesia continues to rise. At least 42 people were killed in the magnitude 6.2 earthquake. It was centered on the island of Sulawesi and hit just after midnight, sending people running from their homes. In a letter from the Vatican, Pope Francis expresses his heartfelt solidarity with the victims. The Catholic Church in Iceland is resuming public masses on Sundays. The government is raising the limit on the number of people permitted to gather in churches from 10 to 20. The bishop is encouraging priests to increase the number of masses offered at their parishes. A convent in Portugal is experiencing a major outbreak of COVID-19. 16 nuns live at the convent of the Conceptionist Sisters, and 14 of them are affected by the virus. The Archbishop is asking the Archdiocese of Evora to pray for a quick recovery. Cloistered nuns in Italy have chosen a solitary life, but even the coronavirus pandemic has been a challenge of their fortitude. 8 nuns live at the convent of St. Veronica Giuliani in central Italy. They took a vow of seclusion and are closed off from the outside world, but they say they are still affected by the pandemic. Some had relatives die, and others could not visit sick loved ones in hospitals. China has administered about 1.5 million doses of the coronavirus vaccine. 2 weeks ago, the Chinese government approved the first COVID-19 vaccine for general use. 240 sites across the capital of Beijing have been set up since the first of the month to vaccinate high-risk groups. The Vatican museums are expected to reopen February 1st, COVID restrictions permitting. The Italian government closed all museums on November 5th. The museum has taken the opportunity to work on maintenance and restoration projects, but after nearly 90 days closed, the Vatican hopes to reopen the museums once again. The U.S. ambassador to the Holy See visited Pope Francis this morning to bid him farewell. Callista Gingrich has been the ambassador to the Holy See during Donald Trump's presidency. In the past 3 years, the ambassador has focused heavily on religious freedom, fighting human trafficking, and supporting women religious. She leaves the Eternal City next week. The European Union has 1.8 trillion euro to help rebuild Europe post-COVID. The final budget was reached in December last year to focus on greener, more digital Europe through research and innovation. It also plans to repair the immediate economic and social damage from the pandemic. Critics say, however, that the family is missing in the overall recovery plan. Vincenzo Bazzi, president of the Federation of Catholic Family Associations in Europe, joins me now. Vincenzo, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on our show. Tell us a little bit more about the EU Recovery Fund and its objective.
Well, the Recovery Fund should be a very big occasion for our society, for our communities, for our countries, but let's say also for our families, especially because we have to think about the future of our continent, and we have to take to pay attention to the fact that in Europe we are living a very bad moment, because we are living a real demographic winter. So we can think about the future if we are able to think about new generation, and we cannot speak just about infrastructures. We need also more children. So I hope that during this time we can speak also about demographic policies. This is what we are asking now to our European institutions, and not only to European institutions, also to the member states, the European member states.
Vincenzo, where do you see European families in the future, and do you think there's enough support?
Well, the point is not too much to support families. Now I want to argue about how the European families can be a resource for the common goods. Now, up until now, we have been considered just as consumers. But I hope that in the future the families can take on also responsibilities. In order to achieve this result, we need, of course, to be considered as a main part of the political agenda, not only as a consumer, but also as a resource. So we need, when we talk about family policies, we have to talk about investments. Because, as I said, we don't consume goods, we can create wealth and richness for the future. But in order to do that, we need, of course, more children, because without any intergenerational balance, we cannot have any sustainable development. And by the way of the Recovery Fund, the goal to be achieved is the sustainable development, and so we say that the basement of this recovery fund should be a real, concrete demographic policy.
Well, Vincenzo, thank you so much for your time today. Vincenzo Bazzi, president of the Federation of Catholic Family Association in Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you. Thank you.
Coming up, a closer look at a proposal in North Dakota that endangers the seal of confession. And the Diocese of Buffalo, New York, celebrates an installation mass for its new leader. A bill introduced this week in the North Dakota State Legislature would force Catholic priests to violate the seal of confession in cases of confirmed or suspected child abuse on penalty of imprisonment or heavy fines. Joining me now on Skype is Christopher Dodson, Executive Director and General Counsel for the North Dakota Catholic Conference. Christopher, welcome to the show. Good to have you on. So what exactly does the language in the current mandatory reporting law in North Dakota say, and how would this new bill change that?
Well, the law in North Dakota has been for some time that clergy are mandated reporters, but there has always been an exception if the information received came from the capacity of a spiritual advisor, which could cover a lot of spiritual counseling, but for Catholics specifically, that covers the act of confession during the sacrament of reconciliation. The bill removes that exception. So basically requiring priests to violate the seal or faced fines or prison time.
What are your biggest concerns regarding this bill?
It's not just the difficult position it puts priests in. It really goes down to our fundamental rights as human persons and in our Constitution. People should be able to exercise their religious beliefs in the United States without the government interfering with the privacy that's expected when we're talking to our clergy on a spiritual matter. It violates the First Amendment. It violates the right and expectation of privacy that people have and their ability to exercise their religious freedom.
I read where you've said this bill comes as a surprise. What do you make of its timing and why now?
Well, I'm not sure about that. We do know that forces opposed to the Catholic Church have been looking at North Dakota for some time, trying to find something to go at. And this could only be just one of the bills. We might see a bill that would suspend the statute of limitations for old cases involving clergy abuse that without going after public schools and public entities. That's talked about. This bill came as a surprise. We weren't expecting this bill, but perhaps the two are related. We don't know. But it certainly wasn't something that was talked about. And this is a small state. You hear about things, but we did not hear about this until Monday morning.
Very interesting. Before we wrap up, as we said, the bill was introduced earlier this week. What happens next, and what, if anything, can be done to stop it?
Well, we're going to activate Catholics and other people of other faiths across the state. In North Dakota, every bill gets not just a hearing, but a vote on the floor. So even if the committee doesn't like it, it's going to a vote of the full Senate. And this is a chance for everyone to express to their senators, whether they're on the committee or not, how they feel about the bill. And we will know how every senator in North Dakota feels about this important issue and protecting religious freedom.
Oh, Christopher, we're going to leave it right there. Thank you so much for your time today. Christopher Dodson, Executive Director and General Counsel for the North Dakota Catholic Conference. Thanks again.
Thank you.
The Diocese of Buffalo celebrated an installation mass for a new bishop this afternoon. Bishop Michael Fisher is now the 15th Bishop of the Diocese of Buffalo, New York. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, presided over the installation. Bishop Michael Fisher thanked the Pope for having confidence in him.
My friends, I offer praise to God, Lord and Shepherd of us all, and my immense gratitude to the Holy Father, Pope Francis, for the gift to now serve as your pastor and shepherd, your brother in faith that unites us as your devoted servant.
Today's installation mass was held at St. Joseph Cathedral. It was live streamed and attendance was restricted due to the pandemic. Bishop Fisher had been serving as the auxiliary bishop of Washington, D.C. Up next, we hear about the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. from his niece, a pro-life advocate. Bishop Michael Burbidge from the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia, is releasing a statement for the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, writing in part, quote, "In his courageous fight against racism and bigotry, Dr. King relied upon faith and prayer. Hope and transformative love were central to his message as he reminded us hate is too great a burden to bear." While celebrations across the country may have a different look amid the pandemic, observances honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. still give us, as a nation, an opportunity to pay tribute to his enduring legacy. Joining me now on Skype to help us do just that is Alveda King, the niece of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She is also Director of Civil Rights for the Unborn for Priests for Life. Alveda, welcome back. Always great to speak with you.
It's always
what comes
good
to your mind as you think about?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Miss Alveda. What comes to your mind as you think about your uncle and his place in history?
When I remember my uncle during the Martin Luther King holiday week, I think about his messages of faith, hope, and love. Part of the King family legacy, the very most famous part of our most famous family member, Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And all of his life, he exemplified solutions that were nonviolent and Bible-based. So I remember Uncle ML, his sermons, his speeches, and the way he lived his life.
I know that faith played such a fundamental role. Can we talk about that a little bit more, its influence, especially in his calls for mutual respect for one another?
One of my uncle's quotes, he spoke about faith, and it's like climbing a staircase. You take one step at a time and the faith builds. And so he was very sure that if he continued to trust in the Lord and to have faith and hope and love, then he could carry a message that God had given him to carry. So my uncle was a nonviolent man. He believed that we were one human race, Acts 17:26, of one blood. God made all people to live together on the face of the earth. And as one human race, we really could learn to live together as brothers and sisters and not perish together as fools. All of his sermons and his messages led us to understand that our answers would come from God and that we must unite and learn to get along.
Such a beautiful message. As we know, in his honor, many Americans celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday by performing acts of service. How important is that in creating positive change?
I believe that as we serve others, then God's love shines out through us. And when we serve others, then that makes opportunities for others to work with us as well. And so that's the way that he was raised. And, you know, he said he had decided to stick with love. Hate is too difficult a burden to bear. And then we bear each other's burdens and concerns, seeing each other as human beings, regardless of skin color. We could see skin color, of course. We really are not colorblind. We could see. But we should see ethnicity as something to be celebrated, not to be fought over.
We don't have a lot of time left, maybe about a minute or so, but I do want to ask you this before I let you go. What would you like Americans to think about as they reflect on your uncle and his legacy?
Martin Luther King Jr. lived a life of service and love. He was a family man, much beloved by all of his family. He loved his parishioners. He was a Baptist preacher. So I believe if he were here today, he would be praying for us and with us, and encouraging us to set aside strife and to come together in love. And as we do that, we can surely be blessed. And 2021 will be a very different year than 2020 turned out to be.
All right, well, Alveda King, thank you so much for your time today. We always appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.